There's a lot of the tactical, which falls into the management. How do you communicate better? How do you promote people? How do you give them positive feedback? To me, though, like the best leaders are really leading from a place of vulnerability and authenticity, and they have taken the time to fundamentally figure out who they are, what they value, how they want to lead from those values. And because I think we all do, whether we're realizing it or not.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we're going to talk about personal values. And you might be curious about what that has to do with being a better leader. Well, when you understand personal values, you're able to communicate with your people in a different way, and you're able to communicate more directly and honestly and be vulnerable where you need to. And it just comes back to being clear about who you are, being authentic, and being able to communicate that and use that with your team. Now, all of this is not going to be just me today. We have our special guest today, Robert Glazer. He is a serial entrepreneur, a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and he's gone beyond just the theory. He's actually doing it in practice with his companies, but also he writes about it. He has prolific on LinkedIn, Substack. He is really trying to create support for people that want to be better leaders. And it's very much in alignment with who I am and what I'm doing. I do it through executive coaching and through leadership development for teams and for executives. But we come together today to talk about understanding personal values so that you can be a better leader. What I really love about this is he makes a distinction between company values and personal values. And then how do you use those personal values to actually communicate with your team to be a better leader? Now, this is what you want to know and understand to be able to see if this is right for you, but hopefully you want to be a better leader. And so lean in, take good notes, and enjoy the interview. Before we get there, I wanted to remind you that my job here is to help you be an extraordinary leader, help you truly understand who you are, be confident, deal with the frustrations, and have more patience when necessary. Now, I say all this because I know it's not easy when you're being pulled in different directions. It's also not easy when you're not able to identify the blind spots that you may have. It's also not easy when you're trying to rally the people around you and your team in midst of all of the challenges that you're facing. And so all of this complexity and chaos is exactly the reason why I help my clients. I help them get more clear about who they are and be extraordinary leaders. So if we can help you in any way, please let me know. You can go to genehammett.com and schedule a call. One tool that we use with clients is a leadership effectiveness evaluation, where we use 7 dials to help you zero in and codify where the issues are within your organization in terms of leadership and help you figure out how to prioritize those and move forward. We do this for free if you're listening to this on a podcast. Otherwise, we actually charge $1,000 for it. But if you mention that you heard it on the podcast, it's absolutely free. Why do we give away a benefit like this? Because we want to engage with our audience. We want to serve them. We know how valuable this is. We've actually been using this internally with clients for years and wanted to make sure that we were able to pull it forward and connect with people who want to actually grow as leaders and grow leadership inside their organization. All you have to do is go to genehammett.com and schedule a call and mention that you heard it on the podcast and you want the leadership effectiveness evaluation. It's a little bit of work to make that happen, but if you're willing to go through it, it's absolutely free and incredibly valuable. Now, here's the interview with Robert. Robert, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Gene?
Fantastic. I want to go ahead and congratulate you. Thank you for being on the 1000th episode that we published a few weeks ago.
Well, congrats to getting 1,000th episode. I don't know a lot of podcasts that have done that.
It's rare, and really appreciate you being a part of something special. And so special, I decided to come back and bring you on for a solo interview because that was kind of a mashup. So our audience, if you're not familiar with Robert Glazer, he's one of the leaders inside of the newsletter space inside of LinkedIn. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I had one of the early newsletters on LinkedIn. I have a couple 100,000 people on it. I don't know who they are, but I can tell you it's or what they read, because that's what happens when you're on another platform. But it's been a great way to connect with people.
Well, it's incredible run that you've had of consistency and growth and impact that you're making. And of course, you've authored a few books and you're a serial entrepreneur. We're going to talk about some of the elements from your books and your work and maybe even some of the new things that are developing. So we're ready to get started. You ready?
I'm ready.
So Robert, when you think about leadership, why do you think it's so important to be a great leader right now?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about most of the problems in the world, they seems to be problems of leadership, and I think leadership has such a multiplying or diminishing effect, right? We've all worked for, maybe some of us have worked for a great leader, and we know like how we felt and how we showed up and the impact we had on others. And most of us, maybe more of us, have worked for sort of a demoralizing leader, and you see how that plays itself out, and the leader can change the characteristics of how people behave and bend their arcs around them. Not to get political, but I think it is important to look sometimes at through a leadership lens at these things. But we've seen certain leaders recently where whom people start acting in ways that they didn't even believe that they could act. They just get pulled into it. So it can be a force for good, or I think it can be a force for evil. But I think in terms of improving the largest problems that we have in the world and impacting people's lives and their families on a day-to-day basis, I think leadership makes a huge difference.
You've been writing about leadership for years, if not decades. What do you think are the top issues that people really need to understand that you feel like they don't understand right now?
In terms of issues, you mean like externally or internally, or
Concepts and
yeah.
principles of leadership that allow us to lead more powerfully.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I've seen consistently, and again, when I'm working with people on our team or coaching them, this is where I sort of orient to, which is to the foundational stuff, which is there's a lot of the tactical, which falls into the management. How do you communicate better? How do you promote people? How do you give them positive feedback? To me, though, like the best leaders are really leading from a place of vulnerability and authenticity, and they have taken the time to fundamentally figure out who they are, what they value, how they want to lead from those values. And because I think we all do, whether we're realizing it or not. So I really sit down with people and focus on their values and their strengths and the different assessments. And when I match it up to the 360 feedback around where they're doing well and where they're not doing well, it all makes, tons of sense. So I think, again, to me, that kind of foundational work is a proxy for being a better leader in the workplace, a better spouse, a better parent. I think you start thinking about leadership in a much deeper realm than, how do I do a good performance review?
Certainly, there's a lot of issues around this. I like to make the distinction in my work on managing the work and leading the people. I think a lot of people confuse those things because they have a lot of conversations about deadlines and quality and issues and whatever we need to do next. But leading the people are things around, confidence or, being a decision maker and whatnot. Do you think of it like that, or do you have a different level of distinction around leadership?
No, so similarly, if I had to think about what is the fundamental difference between kind of a leader or an aspirant and a manager, I think a manager you have to follow, a leader you would choose to follow, right? And so that's a really important distinction to me. Like if that person was to go somewhere, you'd say, I am better working with and under this person or for, like, I want to go work for them. I don't think most people would say that about their leader. There's no power dynamic in true leadership, right? It's not, you never pull the because I'm your boss card.
It's really interesting that you talk about that, because I think a lot of people would not describe leadership with no power dynamic. How did you come to understand that?
Yeah, I think to lead, you need followers, right? and people who do that willingly. I mean, I think you think about some of the people in history, whether it was Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi or Mother Teresa, or these are people who had massive followings and people that would probably go to the end of the earth, but they didn't have any power in the traditional sense. None of those people had to work for them or with them. And so to me, that's the, at the under end of that, we have, increasingly authoritative regimes these days, which are terribly afraid, to have any sort of voting or election or, referendum on anything that they do wrong. So I mean, that to me, that's the antithesis of leadership.
Now, we've been talking with Robert about managers and leaders. It's really important to understand the distinction. There's a lot more to it than just, one is leading through authority and one's leading because they have followers. There's a lot of concepts inside this, but the key thing is there is a difference between managers and leaders. And managers typically focus on the work. Leaders are focused on the people. And you want to make sure that you have people that are focused on work, right? But you also want to make sure that people are growing confidence. They're helping people be more decisive. They're helping people address their fears and become stronger and evolve. Because when you have that, it's very special inside of any organization. Those leaders are able to align people together. They're able to rally when necessary, and they're able to overcome some of the challenges that the organization faces. So just a reminder, you want to make sure that your managers are developing the skills to be leaders. And if there's any way we can help you do that, make sure you let us know. Back to Robert. One of the tools that you use, you mentioned it earlier, and I want to go back to that, talking about a leader should be someone who is sitting down with their people and understanding their values. And there's certainly a distinction between company values and personal values. How would you describe that to someone on your team?
Yeah, so super important distinction, and people get these kind of mixed up all the time. And they're very different processes. So company values probably can start to be determined. They'll be very tied to the founder of the business, but maybe at 10 or 20 people, you can really start to nail these down. And they represent the collective best practices of DNA that those people agree that they want to be held to. I think any organization, whether it's, a company or religious or nonprofit, it's got to have a set of shared values. Say, these are the things that we sort of agree upon. So in that case, it is not reflective of one person. It is reflective of the group, or what the group believes the core DNA needs to be. And then people coming in are sort of screened, against that. They don't have to be clones, but do they at least adhere to these values? And there's a lot of semantical stuff, I think, that people are debating around culture fit versus culture add. To me, shared values doesn't mean everyone is homogeneous at all. But I don't know how you go on a shared mission, which a company is, or a religion is, or an organization is, or nonprofit is, if you don't agree on some basic things that you're going to be held to. And in different areas of your life, that could be different things. So that's the organization's values. And then we as individuals, we need alignment on that, but we have our own personal core values. 99 out of 100 of us can't identify them, but I bet they're impacting the decisions we make when we're frustrated, when we're in flow, or otherwise. I think the work I've done with a lot of leaders is like, let's uncover that. Let's figure that out. Let's own it. By the way, when you do that, you're going to find a lot of it runs deep and to childhood and to formative experiences in your life. And these things are showing up for you as a leader in the workplace. And either you're aware of them and you recognize that they're strengths and you learn how to use them, or they are probably blind spots for you. And I can share like a couple examples of this because I think it's helpful, having done this work with a lot of people. So we had one person on our team, and in going through their sort of personal core values, they realized they had a core value of self-awareness. Well, why did they have this core value? Because they had a parent who was really not self-aware growing up. And that was a major source of embarrassment for them. They love this parent otherwise, but these type of people, they can't read the room, maybe, I don't know, with one drink too many, just kind of out of step with it. And so for this person, self-awareness was really important. And so when people on their team were demonstrating any lack of self-awareness, they were all over them disproportionately. They didn't know why. They couldn't explain it. Once they figured this out, they went back to their team and they said, hey, this is really important to me. And these are ways that, you can do things like this, or displaying on self-awareness are problematic for me, and kind of giving them the playbook. Similarly, we've had several leaders who have identified sort of a core value, or we tend to do this why work too, of trust. People for whom trust is really important have almost always had a violation of trust in their life that makes them keep a very small circle. And what was happening when these folks were in leadership, where if someone on their team was 5 minutes late to a meeting, if they missed the deadline, if they didn't do what they said, they were thrown in jail and the key was gone and they didn't know it, because that's struck very primal things in that person that Gene is not someone that can be trusted. And in my world, if you can't be trusted on little things, you are threatening, to me. These are folks who keep small circles in their life. Well, what did that person do? They went back to the team and they said, if you're on my team, Gene, I just want you to know, like, trust is really important to me personally and as a leader. And I tend to trust, I give trust, but as soon as it's broken, it's really hard to get back. And here are the type of things for me that cause problems with trust, right? Like doing what you say you're going to do, hitting deadlines, being late. And they're just kind of able to give that playbook and kind of own it. And look, some people might do great under a leader that's trust. And they probably inadvertently were finding all other people that were trust oriented on their team, but no one actually had the language to navigate what this meant kind of day to day. And I think it's really, we're in the uncovering of these things, we're never asking anyone to change, but to like own it and be aware of it and understand where it's a strength and where it's a weakness.
What I'm hearing behind this, Robert, is really something interesting that we don't get to talk about much. But when you are identifying what your personal core values are and you're a leader, you're sharing with your team so that they understand you better.
Yeah, they understand how to manage up, right?
Which is one of the conversations that's happening quite often as I'm working with leadership teams and coaching them and they'll literally use the term, how do I lead up in this situation? And
this leader is telling, right? I'm telling you, or in this case, like Gene, like this, like you can do a lot of things, for me, but you can't miss a deadline or tell me you're going to do something you're not, because I just can't trust you after that. And this is, when you're talking about people that are 40 or 50 years old, like these things aren't going to change for them right at that point. Maybe if they really wanted to change and it's still recent and they're very young, yes, but I'm going to go on the thing that this stuff's pretty well baked for those people by then.
What comes to mind is, like, I know one of my values is I don't believe in blaming others. And I'm not saying I've never done it before, but it runs deep.
Yeah. So how does it work when someone on your team is blaming everyone else, right?
It doesn't work well. I get triggered, right? I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm calling them out on it, and we're gonna have a real serious conversation around this because I want them to take ownership of these things and not blame others. And now that what you're saying, it is as part of my plan as well, but you articulated it in a way that hopefully others can understand. It's one of the tools that we use to become a better leader.
Yeah. And it'd be really important for you, Gene, to say that to the people on your team. And if that person just can't change, then they probably can't be on your team, right? And if you're a big company, maybe there's a different team that could fit. But to have that sort of knowing that that's your values and that's how you're going to lead and that's your style, I would say to someone on my team, here's why you would love working for me and here's why you're going to hate working for me. And again, if you have this victim mindset and we're always going to talk about what other people did wrong, it's not going to work. It's not going to work for me, right?
Yeah.
There's some things that are ostensibly good and bad, but there are some other things that are just different, I would say, right? Like someone who maybe has a focus on long-term orientation and someone else who likes to look at the very short term, like that's going to cause some conflict different way. So yeah, you're not going to change, nor should you change. And I actually think you'd attract the right type of people by flying that flag. But to fly the flag, you have to know what's on the flag, right?
I'll give you an example just to make sure this is really clear for our audience. I have an interview question I love to ask because it tells me whether someone's going to blame someone else or take ownership. And it's my favorite interview question. And I ask everyone that comes on my team.
Yeah. And by the way, everyone should interview against values, right? And you're interviewing against your personal core values, but you should have company core values, behavioral-based interview. We have 3-4 behavioral-based interview questions against each of our values. And you can tell when it's someone who aligns to that. You want people, no one should try to answer that differently than how they really feel, because then it's not going to be the right environment for them.
I know one of the things I do inside my coaching work is to come up with frameworks and tools that I can lean on that I know work. What is it you use to help people uncover their values?
Yeah, I had a hard time with this. So I ended up creating a process that we used with our leaders, testing it out 3 or 4 times with about 60 or 70 people and getting to the point where it really worked, and then kind of turning that into a course because it's just, everyone's like, well, how do I do this? I'm like, well, it's not that easy. So, but really it starts with the behavioral based questions that are answered and takes you through looking at the answers to those questions that should carry some very different themes. And the questions are asked around different aspects of your life, things that have kind of worked and not worked, and how to sort of combine those, and then how to look at the wording of that in a way that makes the core value actionable for you. Like, I don't believe in one one word core values. I think they're too ambiguous. They don't, if the goal is to help you make a decision, then something like integrity doesn't help you make a decision. Something like, I have a core value of respectful authenticity. I can look at a bunch of different things and saying, does this meet the standard of respectful authenticity or doesn't it? Right. I'm being respectful, but not authentic. I'm being authentic, but not respectful. I have another one of long-term orientation. So there's just some very specific words that if you want these things to be guideposts, then they have to be very clear to you and to others kind of what they mean. So I turned that into a course. I'm happy to share a link to it at the end, but it's about an hour course. It's not an hour process. You got to play with it, go back and forth a little bit, like any of these things, try it out, see how it feels. And then people start to make some real progress.
So Robert's been talking about personal values, and this whole episode is about understanding your personal values to be a better leader. One of the tools I use when I'm working with clients is I will have a conversation about who they're being that's not in alignment with their true self. And I wouldn't phrase it exactly like that, but when they're able to describe that they're being frustrated, they're being impatient, they're being indecisive, they're being, afraid or whatever it may be, it really is telling, because that's not in alignment with who they want to be. So my follow-up question behind this, when you put all these things together, you get much more clarity about who they are, is who are you becoming? And they're able to articulate and label, I'm going to be unshakably confident. I'm going to be calm in the face of chaos. I'm going to truly, support and be empathetic to others when necessary. I'm going to be direct. These are who you're becoming, and they become a different version of this personal values thing, but really important to understand as you move forward, and so that you know how you're evolving. Now, it's just a different tool I use inside this whole concept of becoming the leader that you want to be. Now back to Robert. I want to give you one chance here, because I know we're going to start wrapping up, but you wrote Elevate Your Team.
Yeah.
Books are hard to write. I'm writing a book myself, which you're aware
harder
of.
to market, but yeah.
Hard to market, hard to get people to pay attention with all of the books out there and everything else distracting us. What is it that you want our audience to know about this book that you felt like, you had to put the effort in to write the book and market the book?
Yeah. So in Elevate, I shared this concept called capacity building and a framework of how to make yourself, how to get better and how to get others better as a leader. This framework of spiritual, intellectual, physical, and emotional capacity, and how to look at that as a framework on how to get better. I wrote the book because I realized along the way, inadvertently, and then if you read it, I talk about my idiot genius epiphany in the beginning, that some of the struggles that we were having at work, I didn't realize the same framework could be the solution. And so when I started thinking about how do you grow an organization organically, how do you create a learning organization that kind of grows from within and grows sustainably, not this 0% interest venture capital kind of steroid growth that we have. It was really those same principles, but I took that same framework and I said, what does it look like to put these principles in the team or in the organization, as opposed to using it as a personal development framework? And so that was sort of the impetus for that book. And I think it's hitting at the right time, because growth has been kind of a dirty word for the last 2 years. Like, people are tired. If you went to most companies that were going to grow 80% next year, they're like, oh, like, if you said that 4 years ago, they're like, let's go get them. Right. I think the toxic growth culture of the last 5 or 10 years has just worn people out, but businesses need to grow to get better and improve. And we're going to get back to growth, but I think it's a different growth playbook. And that's what this book tries to show. How do you grow your company by growing the people? Not how do you grow the company and burn out all the people along the way, because that's the playbook we've been following.
Well, I can get behind this because we're doing similar kind of work in the side of growing people. We do it from our executive coaching and leadership development platforms. But really appreciate you being here, Robert, and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks, Gene. Appreciate you having me.
Wow. What a great interview. I love the simplicity of this, the freshness that he's able to describe this concept of understanding personal values to be a better leader. Now, hopefully you got some notes from that. And I will also say the course that he mentioned at the end there, we didn't get a chance to kind of highlight that, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you want to go get Robert Glazer's course on this, go to corevaluescourse.com. We'll put the link inside the webpage if you're listening to that. And it just really is important for me to give you all the tools that we can to help you move forward. There is a cost to that program, but I do believe if it's something you feel like is necessary, it's worth the investment. And I'm happy to give you access to that if you want to go beyond what we talked about here on the podcast. My job is to help you be an extraordinary leader. We can help you through any of the offers and programs that we offer through executive coaching and team coaching, or maybe it's even developing your managers and leaders. Just let us know. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call today. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, think of courage. We'll see you next time.